Is this some kind of joke? The guard's voice cut sharply through the quiet of the morning, dripping with contempt. He stood firm, arms folded across his chest, a living barrier in a crisp dress uniform, blocking the imposing entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. At his side, another guard, young, cocky, and just as selfish, had smirked faintly, as though sharing in the insult. In front of them stood John Miller, 87 years old. His body bore the weight of age, bent, hands marked by time, his face etched with the long map of a hard-lived life. He wore a plain dark suit. The cuffs were threadbare, but it was spotless, carefully pressed. It was the only suit he owned. John did not flinch at the challenge. His eyes, steady and unclouded, fixed firmly on the rolling green hills beyond the gate, where flags fluttered at half-mast. He chose silence, his stillness a sharp counterpoint to the guard's hostility. The younger soldier moved a step closer, his polished shoes grinding against the gravel path. "Sir, this is a private funeral for General Wallace, invitation only. Show me your credentials, or you'll need to leave." The guard's words rang out like a sour chord in a place meant for reverence. He was a wall of protocol and regulations, blind to anything beyond them. To him, John Miller was just a frail, confused old man who had stumbled into the wrong ceremony. What he could not see was the history that stood before him, the living embodiment of the very ideals this cemetery was built to honor. Tension coiled tighter with each passing second. More cars arrives, sleek black sedans with government plates. Their occupants glanced toward the gate, their expressions mixing curiosity, pity, and discomfort at the sight of the elderly man held back by armed guards. John Miller waited. He had endured worse. The younger guard, Jennings, let out a dramatic sigh, his impatience theatrical. "Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this. The motorcade's almost here, and you're causing a security issue." He gestured down the road with a vague wave. "If you're here to visit a grave, the public entrance is a mile that way. So what's it going to be? Move along or do we have to make you?" John's reply came quiet but steady, carrying unexpected weight like river stones smoothed by time. "I'm here for the general. He would have wanted me here." The second guard, Corporal Davis, chuckled a sharp, humorless sound. "Right, you and the general. Best pals, I'm sure." "With all due respect, sir, General Wallace was a forster. He advised presidents. He didn't exactly spend his free time with people who don't even have an invitation." The insult was obvious, dressed in false courtesy. By now, a small crowd had gathered, a mix of officers in full dress, polished politicians, and grieving family members in black. They whispered among themselves, the low hum underscoring the guard's harsh tones. Eyes bore down on John, some filled with pity, others with irritation or embarrassment. It wasn't new to him. A lifetime of being underestimated had left him familiar with invisibility. Most of the time, he preferred it. But not here, not today. "My name is John Miller," he said, voice even, unshaken. "Tell them John Miller is here." Jennings stepped closer, deliberately invading his space. "John Miller, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names don't mean a thing without paperwork. Old-timer." He jabbed a gloved finger into John's chest. "No medals, no ribbons, nothing to show you ever served. As far as I'm concerned, you're just a civilian trespassing at a restricted event." The words hung heavy. No proof of service. John's hand drifted unconsciously to his side, to the phantom weight of things long set down. His proof wasn't something you could polish or pin to a lapel. It lived in his bones, carved into his memory. From a nearby checkpoint, a young second lieutenant approached, his face too fresh for the bars on his shoulders. "What's the holdup, Corporal?" "This man," Davis said, gesturing at John, "refuses to leave. Claims he was a friend of General Wallace. No invitation, no credentials." The lieutenant's eyes swept over John, lingering on the worn suit and scuffed shoes. His assessment was brisk, dismissive. "Sir, you're disrupting a state funeral. This is your final order, vacate immediately." His voice was polished but hollow, the practiced tone of someone trying to sound like authority before they'd earned it. John's patience, vast but not endless, finally thinned. "I'm not leaving." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "Then, you're under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a military ceremony." He motioned to the guards, "Escort him out. If he resists, cuff him." Jennings and Davis stepped forward to grab John's arms. The crowd stirred, a ripple of gasps. Then the lieutenant's gaze caught on something pinned to John's lapel, a tiny piece of dull metal, crooked and tarnished, no bigger than a coin. Curious, he reached out and flicked it with his finger. "What's this?" "A crackerjack prize." The moment he touched it, the world dissolved. Arlington's manicured lawns vanished, replaced by sucking mud and pounding rain in a jungle half a world away. The air reeked of blood and cordite. The murmurs of mourners became the cries of the wounded. A young captain, face streaked with mud and fear, lay pinned beneath a fallen tree, his leg mangled. That captain was David Wallace. With trembling, blood-soaked hands, Wallace pressed a jagged shard of metal into John Miller's palm. "Keep this, John," he gasped. "It's not regulation, it's not official, but it means more than anything they'll ever mint." It means you were there. It means you saved us. The vision shattered. Arlington returned. The sun glared down, the lieutenant still smirking, oblivious. But John's expression had changed. A long-banked ember flared to life in his eyes. He brushed the lieutenant's hand away from the pin. "Don't touch that," he said, voice low and dangerous. The guard seized his arms. The humiliation was complete. An old man, dragged in front of a crowd, punished for trying to say goodbye. But not everyone remained a passive spectator. Among the mourners stood a young Captain Hayes, who had been watching with growing unease. 2 tours overseas had taught him to recognize the stillness of a true veteran, the quiet resilience in the way this man endured insult without flinching, the way his eyes pierced through chaos. Something here was terribly wrong. When the guards laid hands on John, Hayes knew he couldn't ignore it. Direct confrontation would end his career, but he had another option. Slipping his phone from his pocket, he turned away and dialed quickly. "Sir, it's Captain Hayes," he said urgently. On the other end, Colonel Markinson's voice was brisk, distracted. "Hayes, what is it? The procession's in 5 minutes. Is there a problem with the honor guard?" "No, sir. At the main gate, security is detaining an elderly man trying to get in." Markinson sighed. "And this requires my attention because he says he knew General Wallace. Gave his name as John Miller." Hayes hesitated, then added the detail that had been gnawing at him. "Sir, he's wearing a small, tarnished pin on his lapel. Misshapen, looks like a piece of shrapnel. Silence, not just silence, but the kind that sucks the air out of a room. The hum of radios, the shuffle of papers, all of it seemed to vanish." Hayes held his breath. When Markinson spoke again, his voice had changed. The irritation was gone, replaced by raw urgency. "Captain, what did you say his name was?" "John Miller, Sir John Miller." The line went dead. Captain Hayes looked up just in time to see the guards hauling the old man toward a waiting security vehicle. Too late, he had missed his chance. Inside the command tent, 100 yards from the ceremony, Colonel Markinson stared at his phone as though it had burned him, his face drained of color. With a sharp crack, he slammed the handset onto the table. A young major glanced up, startled. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Get me General Peters," Markinson barked, his voice low and urgent. On the radio, "Pull him from the reviewing stand if you have to. I don't care how. Do it now." The colonel began pacing the tent like a predator in a cage, raking a hand through his hair. His thoughts were racing. John Miller. For years, General Wallace had searched for him, his final, unfinished mission. In his last letter, now locked in Markinson's desk, Wallace had written explicit instructions. If John Miller ever comes, give him whatever he asks. He is owed a debt this nation can never repay. The major returned with a radio handset. "I have General Peters, Sir." Markinson snatched it. "General, this is Markinson. We have a code Shepherd at the main gate. I repeat, Shepherd is active." Static crackled. Then came the unmistakable voice of General Michael Peters, the highest-ranking officer present. His words were stripped of ceremony, ice cold. "Say again." "Colonel, it's him, sir. The description, the pin, the name, it's John Miller, and security is in the process of arresting him." The reply was instant, decisive. "Halt everything. Stop the procession. I'm coming." At the gate, the young lieutenant basked in his hollow triumph. He had restored order, removed the nuisance, proved himself in front of his men. Smugly, he leaned against a stone pillar, watching the guards restrain the frail veteran. He couldn't resist delivering one last humiliation. Striding up to John Miller, who stood between the guards with shoulders bowed, not in defeat but in weary sadness, the lieutenant sneered into his face. "Last chance, old man. You can walk away with what little pride you've got left, or spend the rest of General Wallace's funeral in a holding cell. We'll charge you, and I'll personally recommend a full psychiatric evaluation. A man your age, with delusions like yours, you're a danger to yourself and an embarrassment in public." He twisted the knife deeper. "You want to pay your respects? You can do it from behind bars while you try to remember your own name." That was his mistake, his overreach. The final act of arrogance that pushed too far. A sound rumbled across Arlington. Low and alien, out of place in the quiet sanctity of the cemetery. Tires on gravel, engines growling with purpose. Every head turned. Over the hill came 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, their tinted windows glinting like black glass in the morning sun. They were not moving with the stately dignity of a funeral convoy. They moved like a strike team, urgent and unstoppable. They skidded to a halt just beyond the gates. Gravel spraying. The guards froze, still gripping John Miller's arms. The doors flew open in perfect synchronization. Out stepped, not military police, but 6 men in dress blue, sergeants majors, colonels. Their uniforms glittered with so many ribbons and medals that they clinked softly as they moved. Colonel Markinson emerged first, his face carved from stone, fury simmering beneath the surface. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. General Michael Peters stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, the 4 stars on his shoulders seemed to blaze in the sunlight. The air itself shifted, heavy and still. The wind hushed. The distant traffic faded. Even the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. Every gaze locked onto him. The lieutenant felt his stomach turn to ice. Without thinking, he snapped to attention. His men did the same, their hands recoiling from John Miller as if burned. Peters didn't spare them a glance. His storm-gray eyes swept the scene, cold, searching until they landed on the stooped figure of John Miller. And then everything changed. The general's hard exterior dissolved. Respect deep, solemn, almost reverence softened his features. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, polished boots, striking the pavement with the gravity of a drumbeat, past the terrified lieutenant, past the frozen guards, past the stunned mourners. He stopped 3 feet from John Miller. The world held its breath. Then, with perfect precision, General Michael Peters straightened to his full height, lifted his hand, and delivered the sharpest, most flawless salute the lieutenant had ever witnessed. The salute was absolute, an act of reverence, so rare it seemed to suspend time itself. A 4-star general, bowing in respect to a frail civilian in a worn, threadbare suit. General Peters's voice followed, the same voice that had commanded armies and counseled presidents, now ringing out across the cemetery grounds with unwavering clarity. "Mr. Miller, it is an honor, sir." The crowd stood in stunned silence. The young lieutenant, pale and shaken, finally found his voice. "General S. Sir, I apologize for the disturbance." This man was causing a scene. He had no authorization to be here. Peters's head snapped toward him, his salute unbroken, but his eyes like steel driving nails into the lieutenant's chest. "He has more right to be on this ground than you or I will ever have." "Lieutenant Bend," the general's gaze swept outward, addressing not just the officer but everyone gathered. His baritone carried the gravity of history itself. "You see an old man. You see a civilian, but I see a giant. This is John Miller." To most, that name means nothing. But to the men of the 5th Special Forces Group, to the first warriors of Delta, and to the man we honor today's General David Wallace, he was a legend. They called him the Shepherd. A ripple of recognition surged through the crowd. Whispers passed, half in awe, half in disbelief. The name was battlefield folklore, a ghost story soldiers told in hushed tones. The general's voice rose. With conviction, this man walked into places that never existed on maps, to bring home men our government had abandoned as lost. He was a medic, a pilot, a navigator, and when needed, a warrior of unmatched ferocity. He wore no rank. He refused every medal offered. He said the only reward he needed was to see his boys come home. Peters took a step closer to Miller, his voice thickening. In 1968, a helicopter carrying a dozen Green Berets went down in hostile territory. One of the survivors was a young captain named David Wallace. For 3 days they were trapped, surrounded, outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of rescue. And then, on the 3rd night, the Shepherd came. He carried half those men out on his back. John Miller is the reason David Wallace lived to become the man we honor today. At last, Peters lowered his salute. His eyes locked on the tarnished pin on Miller's lapel. His voice cut like a blade toward the lieutenant. "You see this? You called it trash. It is no trinket. It's shrapnel from a mortar that would have killed Wallace. John Miller took that blast instead. Wallace forged it into a pin himself and called it the Medal of Shepherds. It is the only one in existence. And it is worth more than every medal." In this cemetery combined, the transformation was instant. Pity turned to awe. Soldiers across the field, privates, captains, colonels raised their hands in silent salute to the old man. The lieutenant's face drained of all color. He had not simply erred. He had desecrated something sacred. General Peters turned back. His voice, now a razor whisper, more terrifying than any roar. "You asked him for his invitation. Every headstone on this hill is his invitation. Every flag at half-mast is his welcome. You demanded his medals. His scars are proof enough of a courage you cannot measure. You looked at living history and saw only a nuisance. You mistook a titan for a trespasser." The lieutenant and his guards shrank beneath his words. Peters's verdict was final. "You will report to my aide. You will give him your names, your units, and at 0600 tomorrow, you will be in my office at the Pentagon for a conversation about the meaning of respect. Is that understood?" "Yes, General," they mumbled, hollow with shame. Before Peters could turn away, Miller raised a weathered hand and touched his sleeve. "Michael," he said softly, using the general's first name. "They're just kids, doing their duty the only way they know how. Let it be." Peters looked at him, his sternness softening into respect. Slowly he nodded. Miller then turned to the lieutenant. His gaze held no anger, only wisdom. "Son," he said kindly, "that uniform doesn't grant you respect. It's a promise. Respect is earned, every single day, by how you treat others. And remember this, the greatest sacrifices are often made by those who wear no uniform at all." His words hung in the air like scripture. And then memory returned. The pin's origin. Not a blur this time, but vivid. A field hospital stinking of antiseptic and blood. A young John Miller on a cot, his back shredded by shrapnel. Beside him, Captain Wallace sat with his leg in a splint, clutching the jagged metal pulled from Miller's flesh. "They're putting me in for a silver star for that," Wallace had said, voice trembling. "But it belongs to you. The Army may never recognize it, but I will. I want you to have this so you never forget the price. So I never forget the debt." That pin was born of sacrifice, a brotherhood sealed in fire and blood. General Peters personally escorted Miller through the gates, past the rows of saluting soldiers, past the hushed, reverent crowd, not to the back, but to the front row, beside Wallace's grieving family. They embraced him, weeping, thanking the man who had given them 50 more years with their beloved patriarch. Miller sat quietly through the service, a lone sentinel, his duty complete. The fallout was swift. The lieutenant and his men were not discharged. Miller wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, Peters oversaw their reassignment and retraining. From that day forward, every security unit at military installations was required to complete a new course, the Miller Protocol, a program in judgment, history, and empathy, teaching soldiers to see not just the uniform or the absence of one but the human being before them. It became legend. A lesson in humility whispered to every new recruit, the old man at the gate. Months later, on a gray, rainy afternoon, the lieutenant, now stationed at a quiet base, sat in a diner, nursing coffee. The door opened. An old man walked in, shook the rain from his jacket, and sat at the counter. John Miller. The lieutenant's heart thudded. For a moment, he sat frozen. Then he rose, walked over, and laid a $10 bill beside Miller's. "Cup. For the coffee, sir," he said, his voice thick. He met Miller's eyes. "And for the lesson, thank you." Miller studied him, saw the humility where arrogance had once lived, and gave a small, knowing smile. "Stay safe, son," he said softly. The officer nodded, turned, and left the diner. No more words were needed. Between them passed a silent understanding, one of respect, of gratitude, and of a lesson never forgotten. Because true heroes rarely wear their greatness on their sleeves.